So as I said, I did want to get started at 12:05. I greatly appreciate everybody who was able to make it so far onto the Zoom. As others join, we'll just admit them in. A few administrative notes. We've got an hour together, so I want to be very focused on getting through the content for today's webinar, but also to free up opportunity throughout, as well as at the end, for you to join in asking any questions or getting any, starting conversations. Having said that, you may have heard I just set the record button, so we're going to record today's session. A few things. If there's anything that you want to cover today, please just stop me throughout. We'll have Q&A at the end, and also utilize the chat. I put my contact details in there as my thank you to everybody who's here today. I'd like to offer an opportunity for us to have a one-on-one to dive into a little bit more detail based on what your specific needs and what you wanted to get out of today's webinar. And certainly after today, I appreciate any feedback you can send over via email. And if you really want to say thank you, you can always subscribe to the YouTube channel. There's about 390 videos for things on your career, your professional development, growing a strong business, and building great workplace culture. So that said, I want to dive right in with today's webinar, which is Unleash the Power of Gen Z or Zoomer employees. How do you maximize their performance and productivity? By getting into their heads and getting into their hearts. That said, as we dive in today, I want to start out with a caveat, a disclaimer of sorts. As much as we may think we already understand this creature called Gen Zs, as we do with any of the generations in our workforce, the characteristics, the behaviors are aggregated. So what do I mean by that? They are generalized based on a generation's worth of behaviors, attitudes, characteristics. And every individual is different. You could have in your organization a department, and you can have two Gen Zs, literally, they are sitting next to each other. They even went to the same academic institution. They maybe even started in your company around the same time, and they're fundamentally different. So that said, I wanted to get that out of the way as a disclaimer and move on into what makes me a subject matter expert of sorts into this thing called Gen Z. So a few things just to know about me. I have spent 16 years as an executive coach, a career coach, but also as an organizational development coach, working between the 5 generations of workers to build amazingly powerful teams. I've taught over 3,000 students at 8 colleges and universities in New York and New Jersey. I've done career coaching and professional development programs, over 15,000, specifically 15,000 Gen Zs, and in 35 academic institutions. So long story short, I think I have enough depth and breadth of experience to make today's webinar meaningful for you and give you some insight to supplement what you already know about Gen Zs. So as a general rule, just how do we categorize them? Well, in the same way we do all the generations, we do it by birth dates. So they were born approximately 96 to 2010. So the youngest are 14, 15, the oldest are 28. That's a massive range. So when we think about percent of population, we're talking about roughly 1 in 4, 1 in 5, 69.3 million of them that are out there. And what do we know? What do we know about them? We know that they're incredibly comfortable with technology. In fact, that's almost a detriment from a social perspective because they grew up like this, which makes them a little bit challenged from the perspective of communication skills. The other thing I want to point out is I am an advocate of these individuals. I believe wholeheartedly that they do represent the future leaders of American business and enterprise. Having said that, I get sick and tired when I hear people speak pejoratively of them, or they say things like, these Gen Zs nowadays, they don't boom, 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 or they are boom, boom, boom. Let's talk about what they lived through, given their age. They saw what was done to their parents and their grandparents during that thing you may have put in your rearview mirror called the Great Recession. They saw how companies fired their parents and grandparents. They saw how the banks foreclosed on their parents and grandparents. They saw how they stole, thank you, Wells Fargo and Bank of America, their life savings. So they came of age during that period of time. And then when we say, oh, these Gen Zs don't have loyalty, or they're not easy to build trust with, yeah. And so work through that. Because of what they've grown up with, I remember they're 14 to 28. So many of them have no collegiate social experience. They went through college, as did my daughter, even in a sorority, studying virtually. After some of them went through their high school, junior and senior years, no prom, no graduation in person. Then they go to college and they have a virtual collegiate experience, which I don't know about you all, but to me, college was phenomenally formative. They graduate, they come into the workforce, and their employer says, and I quote, here's your laptop, here's your orientation, vaya con Dios. No socialization, no water cooler. You don't get to come in and spend time with your manager. No learning the culture of the organization other than virtually. You have a Slack channel. Congratulations. Be productive. So we wonder why they're fundamentally in their DNA unsettled and insecure. And then they were raised by us Gen Xers sometimes to be, as helicopter parents, protective of them and not allowing them to experience many of life's trials and tribulations and navigating these challenges. So that's some of the core. But what we also know about them is your organization's ability to leverage them is a powerful, powerful tool. They are, generationally speaking, compared to the four precursor generations, millennials, Gen Xers, boomers, and matures, they are universally educated, higher education. They actually, because they are unsettled, they value this thing called stability. It's important to them. They're a lot more like boomers than millennials, who are their closest in age chronologically. Their top must-haves, what they're looking for in a true partnership with their employers, is they want health coverage. And by the way, health coverage isn't just medical, dental, it's health and wellness. And for them, because of what they went through, it's psychological safety and all of the component attributes of a safe, nurturing culture that they're looking for. They also don't try to sell them on a competitive salary. That's expected. They expect to have equitable compensation. But what's really important about them, what's really interesting, is the relationships that they want to have with their managers. Just like any other generation, they value and need that one-on-one guidance as a coach mentor, but they demand it. They expect it. In other words, because of the way they were raised, they need it. And a majority of them are willing to shift around. How do we label them? According to Patrick Cooper, who studies socio-economic trends and geographic trends and all those other things about values and lifestyles, they're innovative, they're entrepreneurial, they're highly conscious of what their futures are and the challenges they face. But before I go on, any questions so far? I'm looking in the chat. Thanks, Susan.
So far, so good.
Thanks, Jared. Hey, Tom, welcome to the party. So I'm going to dive back in. What else do we know about them? Well, I'm sorry. I want to move on. Organizations are coming to this very interesting crossroads in terms of talent acquisition, especially when it comes to finding, interviewing, recruiting, onboarding, and keeping and developing their workforce, especially Gen Zs, because Gen Zs are fundamentally different than our prior generations in a lot of regards. So one of the central coaching practices that I employ when I'm working with organizations of any size, or whether they're for-profit, nonprofit, government, is shift your mindset from recruiting these amazing rock stars to fill a job, and instead look for top qualities, characteristics, or attributes that, using behavioral interviewing and behavioral talent assessments, we can identify things they've done in the past that are indicative of how they'll perform as a rock star for us in the future. So what the hell does that mean? It means during the interview process, you look at their past work, studies in university, volunteer work, nonprofit, things that they've done in prior work, internships. You're trying to determine their ability to think creatively. So they're critical thinkers, but they also have demonstrated a track record of success coming up with these creative solutions that aren't readily apparent, because you're going to need that in your organization, right? They have this entrepreneurial spirit. What do we know about the state of the American workforce and our 330 million people in this country? We know that the fastest two and largest two segments of the entrepreneurial community are people in their 50s who, after 30 years in corporate America, are starting their side hustle or being forced to do a new business venture. But also the other largest segment of entrepreneurs are people in their 20s. They graduated from school, or maybe they got their first two jobs, and they said, you know what, this isn't for me. This doesn't give me the latitude and freedom. How might you tap into that? And this is something I did for 20 years when I was in corporate, you create greenhouse funding initiatives in your company where you fuel their entrepreneurial spirit by giving them the resources they need to start ventures in your organization, so that they don't leave you to pursue them. They're problem solvers. Look for people who have said, I experienced something in a prior job, or I was faced with such a challenge and I didn't like it. So I solved it. I found a different solution. I fixed it. This generation is really about values and legacy and what your company is doing as stakeholder value to improve society. And to the extent that your organization does demonstrate values, these Gen Zs are going to buy into that. That's important to them. You want to show your rock stars, your superheroes who you're looking for. They've demonstrated leadership. They've shown that they can be as productive on their own, being motivated by themselves, intrinsically motivated, right? Or that they've demonstrated equally a superhero power of team playing. You want to pursue the people who are lifelong learners. And it's on you. I'm sorry. But these rock stars, these Gen Zs, many of them don't have the ability, the training, the discipline, or the know-how to talk you through this set of skills, behaviors, traits that set them apart. It's your responsibility to flush that out when you're doing the acquisition stages, the recruiting, the interviewing. Any questions so far about these generalized attributes of the kind of people you're looking for? These are the skills, the background, the experience. I have, over the last 35 years, come to the realization that it is the height of stupidity to recruit for a job vacancy for a number of reasons. And we don't have the time to get into that, but that's no longer in the 21st century how you bring people on board. It's just a recipe for dysfunction and a suboptimal way to go about your people strategy. So I just want to really emphasize that, as without belaboring at a point. So these are the kinds of attributes I always suggest that we look for instead of filling a job. But there's something else I mentioned earlier. There is a shit ton, pardon my French, a shit ton of poor vision in organizations about your organization's responsibility to tap into this powerful segment, this 20 to 25%, these 63 million workers. What I mean by that is your organization led by managers or leaders? And here's the distinction. Here's the distinction. Management is dead. Management is 20th century. Whether you're thinking about the Latin mano agere or the French management, the word derivation has a connotation of controlling employees. In management, your people are assets, which is a horrible way to position your organization for bringing in future leaders. And especially, it ain't going to resonate with Gen Zs. It's just not. They have a bullshit meter of about 5 seconds. And when they see you trying to dictate the terms of the relationship, even if they deserve it, they're going to balk, they're going to bolt. And this is why everybody says to me, these Gen Zs aren't loyal. Well, actually, they are, if your culture is built on leadership. So what's the difference? What's the difference between managing and leading? And so organically, I can tell you this, having spent 20 years in corporate America and also 15 years coaching over 500 organizations. Leadership is about building a culture where people are their authentic selves, where they come to work, they're doing what they love, they understand your mission, your vision, your mission, your values, you live them every day in your business practices, and you're encouraging them, motivating them for greatness. You're giving them the tools they need to shine, and you're supporting them. And I'll get back to this in a minute, but I don't care if you believe that that's your job or not. Gen Zs are predisposed to expect it. So that's the reality of engaging them in a meaningful relationship. Here's what they expect in total. Understanding that those of you who maybe joined a little bit late, I did start out with a caveat that this is contextual generalization where we're applying identified attributes across a whole spectrum of a generation, and that doesn't always fit. But for the most part, here's an aggregated set of expectations that they as a generation bring to the table when they want to work for you. Or check this out, they don't want to work for you. So what they want, what they need, what they expect, they grew up knowing how to and having unfettered access to information about pretty much anything. I still teach them. I teach a class right now at Berkeley College. I know what their expectations are in terms of them having access to information. When we grew up, when our first jobs or first few jobs in corporate, it was shut up, don't ask any questions, get in before your boss, stay after she leaves. The first year, the goal is to not get noticed and just learn as much. That's not them. They expect you and your organization to give them what they need when they need it. And part of that is, whether it's realistic or not, doesn't matter. It is what it is. They have a high expectation for having unfettered access to their boss, the senior leadership team. It's kind of like the way they grew up as consumers. They expect to be given what they need and what they want when they want it. That's us, the Gen Xers' fault, as helicopter parents, but this is their set of expectations. The other piece of what they expect and need is they want their voice to be heard. They want their ideas to be solicited. You and I both know somebody who's 23 years old, coming into corporate America, talking to somebody in their 50s who rose up the ranks after 30 years, telling that manager or that senior leader, well, here I am fresh out of school and we should do this, and why do we do that, and why don't we do that? That is really almost patently offensive, but that's who they are. Vive la différence. So maybe associated with that, they do have somewhat unrealistic expectations. And I got to go off screen. I love the whole Simon Sinek when he was being interviewed and he was talking about the attributes of Gen Zs, and he talks about, the beauty of them is just mind blowing. They see the ultimate pinnacle, the mountaintop, right, of scaling the organization. They see the trajectory of their career and they look to the very top of the mountain. They go, yeah, I want to get there. Like 15 minutes. They don't realize that, some of you are smiling, they don't realize that it took 30, 40 years. They are automatically looking at where they expect to be without seeing what we went through, which is decades of blood, sweat, and tear equity. They don't have the inclination, the patience, or honestly, the temperament And that's our job. That's our job to Sherpa them up the mountain. That's the best analogy I have, is the whole notion of the mountain metaphor from a career trajectory. So what does that mean for us? I do this to my students all the time. They don't get gold stars just for showing up. It's our responsibility to give them clear and concise communication. This is your role. This is your role on the team. This is your KPIs, your goals that, remember, you and I set together. This is how your individual goals set into the team goals, which map to our organization's strategic business goals. And you're constantly communicating with them. And that means I'm certified in a number of coaching methodologies. It means they need two kinds of coaching as for effective communication. One is what we call proactive, which is you literally, when you catch them in the act of doing something phenomenally successful, you take a star approach. What was the situation that they were in? What was the tactic that they had to follow? What was the action they performed? And what was the desired result? Our jobs as communicators is muscle memory for them, to navigate them through understanding and visualizing, like a world-class athlete, visualizing what successful performance is. And conversely, the other kind of effective communication that's built on coaching is unfortunately far too often done. It's called reactive. So what we do is we see them doing something that's undesirable, suboptimal, and we'll say, okay, here's what you did wrong. It's called reactive coaching. Here was the situation. Here was the tactic you needed to employ. These are the actions that you took. And this was the less than optimal result you achieved. To turn that reactive or negative into positive, we say, I'm going to coach you through in that same circumstance when it comes up again. This is the alternate action or actions that we're going to take. And this is the alternate set of results. So there's really, communication falls in two categories. One is more negative, it's reactive. It's this is everything you did wrong. And that's like speaking Latin to them. They don't do well with criticism because everybody in their high school and colleges took all AP classes. They all got 5.0s. They all were on honors lists. It's an inflated sense of ego and self abilities that we need to readjust. And unfortunately, that's our responsibility. It is what it is. I'm not making a value statement, but far too often as an organization, we fail to take the proactive communication approach with them, and they need it. That's their love language, if you think about it that way. So I'm just going to jump to the next. Again, without making any value statements about whether this is good or bad, I tend to steer clear of that when I'm coaching them one-on-one, as groups, in organizations, in a classroom. I stay away from value judgments, but they need to have a sensitive, thoughtful, dare I say, the second book that I wrote is called The Compassionate Organization. They need to have a compassionate workplace culture that is very in tune with not just their work arrangements, accommodation situation, but they're out of work and how they're doing at any point in time. Work-life balance for them, we can just sit here and say, well, I read the latest McKinsey research, or I know that in our organization, employees are taking advantage of hybrid or virtual work. I have people telling me that coming in the office on Friday is a showstopper because they typically go down to the Jersey Shore. The really, really strong candidates, whether they're Gen Z, millennials, Gen Xers, boomers, matures, I don't care. In any of those, the really successful, intrinsically or self-motivated individuals are cognizant of creating a balanced framework. There is no such thing as work-life balance. We all know it. At any given point, we may be caring for an ill-loved one. We may be doing things that are projects at work that require us to work late nights or weekends. And yes, I know some of them have said, oh, I don't work weekends. I don't work nights. That's unfortunately part of their generational construct, but also it's situational based on each worker. But they and we understand that there's going to be times where they have to commit more to work and more to their outside of work. And the way that you understand how each is hardwired, believe it or not, is to get to know them. Not at a superficial level, but a deeper level. And the other piece of this communication is, what does your organization stand for? Seriously, what does it stand for? I mean, I do a podcast called Chasing the Dream. I've spoken to business owners, leaders. I have 35 years of skin in the game. I can tell you what Chobani or Kind or Tom Shoes or Disney, Pixar, Marriott, DuPont, Gore, Wegmans, Trader Joe's. Company I had the son of the founder come on from Southern California, the tomato company, Morningstar. I can tell you what your organization's values are. And my question for you all is, to what extent are you living those values with your people so that they can see, in terms of work life, their commitment and how engaged or disengaged they are is predicated on if you share their values. If you live the values your organization subscribes to. I have a bullshit meter where I do a organizational audit. I will literally take some time coming in and saying, what are your values? What are your values? And they'll tell me, and I'll go, okay, how do you live them? And how are those conveyed to your Gen Zs? How do you make those values the core essence of how they interact in their culture? 99 times out of 100, an organization can't answer that, lie about it, or literally they're confusing two different things of their culture. Formal is aspirational, what they say it should be like for a Gen Z to experience, and informal is what it actually feels like when they come into or log on every day. That's what culture is. And so there's sometimes a distinction. Any questions about this thing called effective communication? I know I'm going really quick. I want to leave ample up.
I was gonna say, Ethan, yeah, do you think it also, like, it almost maybe is like can create a chain reaction? What I mean by that is the people like that are us who are at the company now, right? If we aren't, or if the company just from top to bottom doesn't hire people who kind of espouse those values, then does it sort of just start this chain reaction that goes all the way down, versus it kind of starts from the top of whoever's at the top espouses these positive values and the values that Gen Z looks for, and then it kind of starts at the top and works its way down. So you think there's almost like this ripple effect that can kind of compound that as well?
Yeah, Jared, really thank you. I live in that world in which that's one of the driving factors of how Gen Zs are perceiving what culture is. So, there's a saying, the fish rots from the head or poop flows downhill. Absolutely. It is incumbent upon senior executives to emulate or model in their interactions and behaviors core values. And then it trickles down. So absolutely. I would, Jared, take what you said, which is so phenomenal, and I invert it also, or I'd flip it on its head, meaning in the moment you start to first speak to that individual, I literally architect a 365-day new hire communication plan in organizations. The minute you start talking to them about the prospect of joining, so whether it's setting up the interview, hiring an outside search firm, or the way you write job descriptions and the way in which you convey the values, it begins from day one. On an interview, do you reinforce what your core values are? I'll give you another one, Jared, which is something that I've kind of integrated into companies of anywhere from 10 employees to, thousands of them. If your organization has a short list of, let's say, 4, 5, 6 core values, right? Those are core values. Those core values are tied into your business goals for the year, your team goals for the year, and your individual goals. And you can and should, every one of those goals, individual, team, and organization, are measurable. You have numbers that define success, and each of those goals are married to one of, if not more, of your core values. How do you reinforce them? So it is top down and across and in and out. You're constantly reinforcing the values, as Jared was saying. Every week in your team meeting, you have probably an agenda, right? The first item every week in and week out on your agenda should be something where you're talking people to talk about prior week. What did they do that was successful or a challenge in honoring your organizational values?
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ethan.
No. And I'm sorry that that was kind of broad, but not too deep. But we can definitely, all of us, talk one-on-one afterwards. But to Jared's point, absolutely. Gen Zs are astute observers of the human condition. They have grown up watching what generationally speaking, their elders do and don't do. They see it all the time. I mean, just not to kind of sidetrack, but look at a company like British Petroleum. Look at a company like British Petroleum. You can go out and you can research their organizational culture. You can go and look on employee reviews. British Petroleum for 50 years has had in their operating budget a line item every year where they pre-fund lawsuits because their employees and families of employees sue them because their employees die. So yeah, it's bottom up, it's top down, and it's collectively. They see very quickly whether you do or don't have values as an organization, and they readjust their expectations. And if they feel like you're doing something that's not kosher to them, or to their friends or their coworkers, they check out emotionally. They do what the new kind of phrase is called silent quitting. The work performance productivity takes a hit, your profitability takes a hit, and they're going to leave. They're going to leave. And they don't just say, I'll stay around for 5 years or 2 years. They update their LinkedIn profile, they're gone immediately. It's a transactional relationship a lot more quickly than it used to be with us. I hope that helps. So I do want to move on, though, because I want to make sure I cover everything. So having said that, kind of along the lines of what Jared was asking is, they want you to respect them. They want you to consider their work-life balance, even if they're unrealistic expectations, because they can be a little bit narcissistic or self-involved. We all know it. I'm not saying anything which is like revealing. They want you to share their values. And they want you to be able to facilitate a culture where they can forge meaningful relationships. They didn't get this maybe in college, or maybe their first 2 jobs, they didn't know how to themselves have meaningful relationships, or they weren't given opportunities. Your organization will excel if you build this into your culture. The other is the gold star. We all know that's how they were raised. Good boy, good girl, good performer. It's almost like the Benny Hill, here's a jelly bean. They want meaningful public praise. They want rewards and recognition that's customized to them individually. Oh, here's a gift card. No, that's lazy, and it negates their individualism. They want you to deliver things that are meaningful for them. And again, whether this is fair or not, it's not a value statement. Whether it's realistic, not a value statement. I said before that they are entrepreneurs. They are, generationally speaking, they solve problems, usually using technology. One way to capture from literally the first day that they join your organization is what I call an idea generation program. And I spent 20 years implementing this when I led teams at places like Reuters and Dun & Bradstreet and Time Warner Cable. They need this. What you do is on an annual basis, you set aside a budget with a set amount, and you give a 2-year commitment if you've never done this. So not just 1 year, but 2. You have a cross-functional senior leadership team, but also people not just at senior level, but middle management and less seasoned professionals. So cross and at those 3 levels, you bring them together into an idea generation program where you communicate to your whole organization. You're going to be actively soliciting ideas that fall into 2 categories. 2. Opportunities to generate additional run rate revenue, so new products, new services, new markets, new client segments, and commensurate with revenue generation is cost reduction. They're closest to the work. Anybody who does the work is in a better situation than managers or senior leadership to figure out how to architect the work. So idea generation programs, when they first join, part of the onboard, they should automatically be assigned to a coach or a mentor. Those are not the same. A mentor is somebody who has senior chops, they've been around in their careers, they can give advice and counsel that isn't specific to job performance. It's advice and counsel on careers, professional development, sounding board. A coach is somebody who is assigned to an individual specifically to help assist in them performing and producing in their current role at a high level. They are always looking ahead, generationally speaking. They're always looking to the next act, the next gig, which is why things that are helpful don't cost anything for you to retain them, especially those who are the rock stars. Because if the rock stars don't feel fulfilled, they'll bail on you 3, 4, 6 months, doesn't matter. So career and professional development, a formal plan during your 90-day onboard probation, you develop a career professional development plan with them. Part of that is what are the resources they need. You walk them around, so to speak, literally and figuratively, to other key project leads, influencers in your organization, and you introduce them so they get maximum exposure. Job sharing. Maybe you marry them up with 1 or 2 other employees so that they work in different functions of the area. Maybe you hired them for marketing as a junior associate, but they're better served in customer care or product development. So you job rotate them and you have them also share. These are things that don't cost anything. I mentioned it before, core values. The other thing is, I don't care how many employees you have. You can do something very easy called employee resource programs, where you allow them to find their peers who share interests, whether it's software development, social, socioeconomic, ethnic, different races. Allow them the opportunity to connect with their peers through your organization to build relationship stickiness. They are, in many ways, generationally speaking, exhibitors of introversion tendencies. And it's just a fascinating thing how powerful it is to buy their commitment when you offer these employee resource group programs, these ERPs. As I said, move them around. Allow them the latitude of seeing what other groups are, other projects and teams, other functional areas, other office locations. Have them work on site, maybe at one of your most valuable clients. Have them work with other people. This is a great opportunity when you do job sharing to marry them to a coach and or mentor, or a peer who's on their team, who's been there for a few more years, who's a little bit more seasoned. Flexible work is interesting because we're past COVID, but we're not. What the hell do I mean by that? I'm sick and tired of people saying, I want my employees, these Gen Zs, to come in. I told them to come in. First of all, it's not about you. Nobody gives a crap what you need. It's about what they need and want. And most of them probably have been starved for meaningful interaction, so that's what they want. But I'm constantly amazed when I have an organization tell me, our edict was everybody needs to come into the office. It's good for them. Okay. How do you know it's good for everybody? Well, just because we know that people's productivity goes up, they need interaction. And I'm like, okay, but I know for a fact, because I teach them every day, there are people in their early 20s whose parents or grandparents are ill. They are the oldest sibling, so are responsible for taking care of all their siblings. They take care of and take their parents and grandparents to hospital visits. You're telling them they have to be in the office. Do you know them at a deep level? No, but we just said they have to come in. You can't make these blanket assumptions based on the totality of 100% of your workforce, whether you have 5 people or 50,000. It's Why I structure in my consulting practice, every team lead is responsible for knowing who on her team or his or their team needs to have every day in the office, 3 days in. But understand that just because they're not there, if they're not being productive, I hate to say it, it's not their issue. That's your fault. And we don't have to get into an argument. I'm saying the way it is. It's just the way it is. And it literally starts from who you hired. If you hired somebody who's just checking the clock, she or he isn't doing their work, they don't want to come in because they're not interested in forming a team, they don't need that. You screwed up during the interview and recruiting process. You didn't exhibit a behavioral interview process. You didn't do a personality assessment. You don't know what their characteristics or preferred communication style. That's where we figure this out. So having one policy for all is myopic, it's short-sighted. So I just wanted to mention that. They're individuals, and that's how you understand how to motivate them. I talked about feedback. Every opportunity for a Gen Z to get feedback is gold. It's gold because they're starved for it. They grew up to be incentivized like, a dog jumping through a hoop. They want the gold stars, but it's also a great way for you to mold them despite what they did or didn't learn before joining your organization. It's teachable moments. And the way you do that most productively is your community and your, as Jared asked, your senior leadership. It starts at the top. You have to have community engagement as a core value. You have to have a positive relationship with the communities that your people live in, and you have to care about your organizations and your people's legacies. At the end of the day, what do you want your business or your organization to be known for? And the way to go about this is one of the things I've developed. It's a proprietary process. It's a 10-step program. It's a human capital audit. You literally look at your organizational org chart and you say, we're in 2024, the fourth quarter. Now's the time to start doing your strategic planning. You should not be doing anything in your strategic planning until you start to do a people strategy. And the people strategy encompasses a human capital audit. And what does that mean? I'm just going to break it down so it's real simple. Do you have the right people in the right roles right now to ensure success? And the human capital audit is a way of thinking about every employee, and this is awesome for Gen Zs. If you hired your people to perform a job, the job description, this is where I said earlier, this is a silly process. If you hire people for a job using a job description, more than likely, let's be real, you had under the job description roles and responsibilities. So you said, for this job, we're going to pay this amount, and with health and benefits, you're going to get compensated this much. You're going to be doing these 5 or 6 things pretty much. What you've done is you've automatically now flushed 75 cents out of every dollar of people investment down the drain. Why? Because to find that 1 or 2 people or however many to do that job with those 5 or 6 roles and responsibilities, what have you not looked at? Their portfolio of skills, the totality of what makes them amazing. Language proficiency, cultural diversity. Did they live or study abroad? Are they active in the communities? Are they primary caregiver of their families? Do they have certifications, accreditations? Have they gone back to school as a mid-career person? You've ignored all of that to figure out that you need in this job right now somebody to come in immediately and do that work. And so you look for that set of skills at the detriment of searching for everything else. And guess what? Your business competitive landscape, technology, AI, ChatGPT, supply chain, all that other crap. In 3, 4, 6, 9 months, that job is going to need to be morphed or transformed. And you may or may not have the right individuals because you're hired for that outdated set of requirements. It's fundamentally how we rethink our strategy for people anyway. And yeah, Gen Z is just one piece of that. So the last bit I'll talk about how to motivate them is employee stock ownership plans. We know now there's no excuse. You cannot argue this objectively in a rational, sane, matter-of-fact way. Organizations who have their employees have a stake in owning the company, whether it's a portion or the whole company, those organizations fundamentally, universally, financially outperform their competitors. Why? It's not freaking rock science. It's called skin in the game. It's skin in the game. When your people at any age, at any point in their careers, they have a vested interest in the financial success of your organization, they're going to be driven. And then, of course, it behooves you to then give them the power, the decision making, the autonomy to take ownership of their work. And then your job is no longer a manager. You're a leader who facilitates them optimizing their performance on the teams that they have to join on a project basis. I don't know if you guys have seen this. Merriam-Webster has come out with their 2024 slang, Gen Z slang. I don't have you guys seen this? It's freaking hysterical. But it's their love language. You want to kind of get to understand them, which means spending more time with them outside of telling them what they need to do, why they didn't do a good job. They have to come in the office. It's building relationship with them, is being able to speak their language and understand them. So what's my takeaway? Because we're coming up on the hour and I want to give some time for Q&A and just kind of talk as a group. I set out 15 years when I went out on my own to say I was treated so poorly in corporate America for 20 years that I would never, ever go into another organization, but rather I'll work with them to unleash their people's untapped potential. Gen Zs are our future leaders. The question is not, how do we sit and bitch and moan about what they're not? How do we position them for success in our shared relationship ownership with them? So in a second, I'm going to open it up to questions and we'll just talk this through. But I just wanted to say, before we all leave, I wanted to say thank you for taking the time to come in on a Monday at noon, grab your lunch, and just spend some time together. So I'm just going to ask, does anybody have any questions? Or need clarification? Or don't agree with anything I said? Or something I said?
Thanks. Then I got maybe an interesting question. You mentioned kind of earlier there's a list of attributes that are kind of key to get at during the interview process. Some of them were a little bit more, like I think entrepreneurship was one, intrinsic motivation, things like that. What's maybe one example of one of these traits that's trickier to find out through sort of the standard screening and application process? What's maybe one way to try and engage that in a potential applicant?
It's a phenomenal question, and I'll kind of share with you the most powerful insight you can gain into them. It's hard to obtain that during the interview process, and I'll tell you what I mean. I'm putting on, Jared, for your question, my teacher hat. One of the things that amazed me was these students graduate from college with a very varied experiential base. So I've taught at Fordham, NYU, Columbia, St. John's, Stevens, St. Peter's. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. But it amazes me how some students had a silver spoon from an early age. They didn't have to worry about paying for college. They didn't have to worry, like some of their contemporaries in other academic institutions, about their parents saying, you're not going to college, you're coming and working in our dry cleaner or a restaurant. If you want to go, that's your responsibility, but you're still going to work in our family business. Oh, and you're the eldest, so you're responsible for, oh, and by the way, we have a sick grandparent, you're going to take them. And that student graduates with a 2.7 GPA from, let's say, a school that is in a top tier desirable school. And organizations right out of the gate screw up their relationship with Gen Zs by not finding these rock stars, Jared, with that list of attributes, because their recruiting source is going to a poisoned well. It's very easy to go to Duke or Emory and look for an econ major or finance major with a 5.0 and a dual minor in economics. And guess what? They have that because they had a silver spoon since birth. I have two of my nephews who lived that life, and they worked in private equity firms. So one consideration is rethinking your recruiting strategy. The second, Jared, is what is that short list of key attributes? They may say something on their resume that sounds a little bit like they started a side business while they were in college, or they started a programmer or hacker club. Those are creators. Those are socially oriented individuals who bring people together. Maybe they started a business club or a GoFundMe. Or maybe during an entrepreneurship, I taught entrepreneurial thinking at Stevens and at Fordham. Maybe they started as a class project, an initiative that they had to go outside and get equity or funding for startup. Those are the things to explore. Looking at college work, if they don't have a lot of experience, are they a Girl Scout or an Eagle Scout? Nothing says that somebody's going to be a future leader more than having those two credentials in their portfolio. That's a level of commitment, a level of engagement. Where did they perform in a sports venue, a competitive sport? That's commitment. That's work ethic. So those are things when you see it on a resume, Jared, to probe. And I hope that was helpful. But again, the short list is critical thinker, creative problem solver, team-oriented, intrinsically motivated, effective communicators. Those are things that you can flush out. And a behavioral interview, it's not the way people used to interview. It's not saying, how would you do this? That's bullshit. A behavioral interview is going back to a prior experience the candidate had, the Gen Z in this case, and saying, I noticed in your previous job, or I noticed when you were in school, you did this. Were you successful? Why? Why not? What did you learn from that experience? We're going to need you to do something similar in this role. Based on that prior job, how would you handle this? Do you enjoy, not do you enjoy, actually, that's a bad question, but I noticed in this school project, you worked on a team. What is your experience working in a team? What did you learn about yourself? When do you find as a student in college, what were the most successful working in team situations? So you're asking them to model for you a little bit of a vision into their past performance, because we all know past performance is indicative of future behavior. Yeah, I'm sorry, Jared. That was verbal diarrhea.
No, that answered it perfectly. Thank you, Ethan. Appreciate
Thank
it.
you. We can talk about this whole process of vetting through behavioral interviewing. There's a whole model of talent acquisition now, which is looking less at superficial, irrelevant things like school, GPA, major, and looking more at extracurriculars, club focus. And that's why when my old recruiting hat, I would tell college students, I want to see you have a LinkedIn profile. I want to see you have an updated resume. And I want to see you have something that says additional skills and background and experience. So yeah, absolutely. Anybody have any questions, thoughts, top of mind? What's bothering you or biggest challenge about Gen Zs other than their lack work ethic or loyalty?
Nothing's bothering me, Ethan. I just want to say thank you for this presentation. I certainly in learning and development, and that's where my expertise is in.